Well, I originally wanted to be a music journalist when I was a young person and a teenager. And I can tell you the moment that I changed my mind, it was when I watched Gone with the Wind on TV when I was 16. It was a Sunday morning. I'd been out the night before, wasn't feeling great. And it was on the TV and I watched it and was completely blown away. And this was, several years ago now. I'm not going to say how many, but I watched it on the TV in the living room and I thought, that was the first moment I remember thinking, this is cinema, this is something amazing. And I felt compelled to write about it. So I just wrote about it for myself. And from then on, I was adamant I wanted to write about film. It was that clear an opinion of what I wanted to be. And of course, parents being parents, they said, you can't focus on this, you have to do things, you have to go to university and do something more general because you probably won't get anywhere in film because it's so competitive. So I found the closest degree I could find to film studies, which was American Studies, and majored in film. And while I was at university, I got involved with my student paper, wrote about film, became film editor, just thought this is what I want to do. So came out of university. I was very lucky in that I found a job pretty quickly as a general assistant / dog's body for a magazine publisher, which included among its titles Film Review. And I think they recognised my continuing badgering for a position on Film Review. I became editorial assistant in 2002, and that's it. That's been my career ever since. I worked my way up.
And that is entirely your career?
That
you
is
don't have a day job?
I don't. I've been in film magazine editorial since then, and have recently gone freelance following the birth of my baby. So, but since then, nothing else. Film journalism has been my bread and butter since I was at university, really.
Okay, so what do you think film criticism is? Like, what's its point, what's its value, what's it for?
I think there's a difference, I think, between film reviewing, which we see a lot of, and film criticism. And I think that difference is quite important when you're talking about this subject. Film criticism it's thinking about a film in terms of itself, but in terms of its place in history, in terms of its place in society. It's really about reading a film and what it is in a wider context, and then having the ability to share your views with an audience in a way that they're going to understand. So whether you like a film or hate a film, it's a way of reading that film and bringing things that perhaps audiences might not see, perhaps ideas that you might not share with anybody else, but are still valid to a wider audience.
And you said, regardless of whether you enjoy the film or not, how important a place do you think evaluation has in film criticism? I mean, does it have a role at all for you?
In terms of defining what you think about a film?
Yes. I don't want to suggest that evaluation is the only aspect of film criticism, because it obviously isn't, and you've already listed some of the other aspects. But do you think it's important at all?
Yes. I think to be a critic, you have to be able to form an opinion, and I think that's what criticism is really. It's your opinion as a film critic about a film, and it's sharing that opinion and explaining that opinion, whatever it might be, to an audience, a readership. I think anyone who says that film reviewing isn't opinion-based or film criticism isn't opinion-based is missing the point, because as an individual critic, you have an individual response to a film, and criticism is about sharing that response. It's about translating that response into a piece about a film that will touch somebody who reads it, so make them think they want to go and see that film, make them understand about it if they've seen it, make them open their eyes to new films. It's most certainly about opinion.
And evaluation is certainly one of the main ways in which opinion on film is expressed, but there's also a tendency for a lot of publications to use a star rating system or an equivalent, some kind of reductive rating system.
Yes.
Do you have a stance on those? Do you like star ratings? What do you think they're for?
I think they're for promotion. I think they're for publicists. I think they're for the casual reader. They're for somebody who'll see a review, 4-star rating, think this review might be in line with what I think I'm going to think about this film, and they'll read it. I think they are reductive. I think you're right. Having been on both sides, having commissioned reviews that have needed a star rating, and having written reviews and having to give a star rating, it's sometimes very difficult to distill what you think into a star rating. So I think in long-form film criticism, they're probably not necessary. Well, probably not necessarily generally, but they're probably not used in long-form film criticism. I'd say they're more the domain of a review where publicists actively ask for star ratings from critics, because it's an easy thing to publicise a film. A 5-star rating from a mainstream publication is gold dust. So I think they have a place in the huge kind of industry as a whole. I think it's very difficult to reduce film criticism down to star ratings. I think they're probably more the domain of a film review, which I would say is different to film criticism.
Have you ever had a star rating that you've assigned to a film altered by an editor? And
I've had discussions with editors who suggest that my review in itself reads as a different star rating than what I gave it. Fairly recently, actually, that's happened in the last week, and the best editors will discuss that rating with the journalist. As an editor, I wouldn't dream of changing a star rating. If it didn't fit with the tone of the review, I would have that discussion. But yeah, I've never had it changed without my knowing. I've had, as I say, conversations where we've come to an agreement. But yeah, never changed without my knowledge.
If one word changed,
yeah,
would it bother you?
Yes.
Okay. That's
A publicist has misquoted a star rating I gave to a film on a big transport poster once. I'm not going to say who it was or what the film was, but they assigned an additional star to it, which pushed it into something they wanted to promote their film, and that really bothered me. Really bothered me. It's happened a couple of times where I'm absolutely positive it's an accident, but I think that would bother me more if a publicist, took some words out of context, if they took a star rating and bumped it up and then put it on a poster, which the out of context thing I know has happened to a lot of critics, and that's a problem, because you, as a critic, as I said before, it's your own opinion. You're very possessive of that opinion. You want to share it, but it's your opinion, and it's not up to anybody else to change.
I think you said that you began your career in 2002.
I did.
In a sense, 13 years isn't a long time, but it's a long time in film criticism, especially now. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how the business has, not the business, but how film criticism has changed since you first started.
It's changed hugely. I mean, it's indicative of the whole film industry that the digital revolution has changed things at a pace that everybody is struggling to keep up with. I would say I'm probably the last generation of film critics that started their career when criticism was in print first and foremost. I mean, the internet, obviously, I'm not that old. The internet was there when I started my career, but social media, the boom in social media has happened since. When I started, to be taken seriously as a critic, to really make it your profession, you had to have a print outlet. You had to be on staff, or you had to freelance for a print outlet. In the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years, that has completely changed. Twitter, Facebook, blogs, the ease with which it is to set up your own website has changed film reviewing hugely. Anybody can now become a film reviewer because they can set up their own website, they can set up their own blog, and because of social media you can share that with an audience that perhaps some print publications could only dream of, because it's immediate, it's global, there are no barriers to it. I think a diversity of voices and opinions about film can only be a good thing. It can only be a good thing. I think in terms of I think there's a difference between film reviewing and professional criticism, as I've said before. I still think that professional critics, to make a name as a critic, is very difficult now, and you really do have to be writing for a respected, well-known publication. I think it's very difficult for a critic to make a name for themselves, or to get a wide audience when they haven't got that behind them. That being said, it is possible. Some of the best critics I know write for their own sites, and it's the same as with filmmaking. It's about the quality of the work. It's about if you're a great reviewer, if you're a great critic, if you can put your ideas across in an informed, articulate, entertaining way, an audience will find you. So I think a diversity of voices is a good thing. I think there's an element of online film reviewers that perhaps need to develop slightly, and they, in terms of their skill, in terms of their writing, also in terms of how they sort of behave within the film criticism realm. But that comes with experience. So the internet, the online domain, is a fantastic breeding ground for new writers, and you can't dismiss it in any other way, really. That's a really difficult question to answer, and I think that extends out not just from criticism but to online content as a whole, and it's whether people are prepared to pay for online content, because we've had it so good for so long. We've had information for free at our fingertips. That's a really difficult question for me to answer as a critic. I would like to say yes, and I would like to say that I don't think print is going to die out entirely at all. I think they can coexist. I think there's always an appetite for print as well as online. It's going to be more difficult to make a living as a critic, full stop, as we move ahead, just because of the way audience are changing, the way media is changing. I think there are still people clamouring to be film critics, but whether they can make a living from it, I'd like to say yes. I really would like to say yes, but I am dubious. But one would hope that people will pay for great writing, just as something like the Times has a firewall and people pay for great writing from their columnists. One would hope that people will pay for great arts criticism. Yes, I think the opportunities are there. I think the platforms are there. If you look at some of the main film critics in this country, the Times, for example, has got two strong female film critics, Kate Muir, Wendy Ide, Larishka Ivanzadeh at Metro. There's some really strong women writing about film, for sure. So I think within film criticism itself, there's definitely scope for women. There's definitely opportunities. We are given the same opportunities to write about films as men. It's from, in my opinion, in my experience, it's from the readers where you start to get, there starts to become problems, because a lot of female film critics that I know have been personally attacked by doing nothing other than reviewing a film purely because of their gender. So I think female film critics come under a lot of attack because we're women. I mean, male film critics, people might disagree with them, but their gender is never called into question when they are, and I call it at the bottom line of the internet, never look, never look. If you're a female film critic, never look in your comments, because it becomes personal to your gender, to your looks, to your, every opinion that we ever have is because we're women, or is formed by our gender, whereas men never have that. So to keep writing when you're subject to that it takes a strong character. It's difficult sometimes, and by no means have I had it as bad as some, but I've been on the receiving end of it, and it's not pleasant. But you have to remind yourself that it's the minority of readers who, for example, believe that I, as a woman, can't review a superhero film or a horror film. And one of my favourite genres is horror, and I've had numerous men tell me that I can't possibly understand it because I'm a woman and therefore associate with the role of victim, which, I mean, says it all. Do you know what I mean? So,
does that make it feel all the more important to you to get your reviews of, say, genre material or horror films out there, so that there is this alternative voice and this counter voice to this perception that women can't write about horror?
Absolutely. I mean, women, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as 99% of people are concerned, can write about or can form great opinions on all genres. We're not just interested in, I'm not a big fan of the romantic comedy, which is supposedly a girl's film. Do you know what I mean? But then a romantic comedy can be good. A horror film can be bad. I write about films on an individual basis, and I write about them in terms of how I see them, how I view them. It doesn't matter what genre they are. And I think, as a woman, female critics do bring a different experience. We bring a female experience to it, but we bring our own individual experiences. We perhaps see things slightly differently. But then that's like saying all male critics think one thing and all female critics think another. We don't. We think individual things. And just because I might be the lone voice saying something's not very good, that makes it no less valid an opinion. What I have to do as a critic is validate, explain that opinion in a succinct or well-informed piece of writing. It would be no good for me to say that's rubbish, and then 1 star. that's not film criticism. I have to be able to explain my view, regardless of what the genre is.
It's on. I think I can't remember the exact figures, but I know that there's a similar perception for viewers as there is with critics. There's this belief that with horror in particular, that horror is a male genre and only guys like to see horror. But in fact, the figures would suggest, the figures from box office takings would suggest that that is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
In fact, more women pay to see horror films in cinemas than men. And do you think that one of the ways in which these misperceptions can be addressed is precisely by having intelligent, critical voices that come from that come from the gender that loves horror, rather than the one that's perceived as loving horror? So I phrased that really.
No,
you know what I mean?
I think it's important. I think it's important. I think film criticism, professional film criticism, is part of the wider industry. So I think it's very important for young women to see. For example, when I expressed my desire to go into film criticism, there was not a lot of support. You know, the school guidance, I remember the career guidance, people didn't really understand it, you know, because it's sort of an abstract thing. So I had to really stay determined. And so for 20 years of my life, I've been determined to follow this career path. And it is difficult. It's difficult for me because it's difficult, not because I'm a woman. It's difficult for everybody to do this as a career. But I think it's important that female critics, male critics, keep writing strong, informed pieces, so that audiences of any genre can think, you know, if there's a young woman who wishes to become a film critic and she's looking for examples, I want her to know that she can write about anything. She can write about, you know, like we all do as critics, as professional critics. One week we might be writing about, you know, a slasher film. The next it's some Oscar contender. We have to be flexible in terms of our passion. And I'd say that a professional film critic has a passion for film, full stop. You know, we have genres that we perhaps prefer, but I think you have to be able to remain open-minded. I mean, if you go into a film thinking, I'm going to really dislike this film, that's not what you should be doing. It's difficult sometimes, but you should remain an open mind. And then if you hate it, write about why you hate it. Don't just dismiss it, because I've seen a lot of reviews that are very dismissive without any substance, or very full of praise without any substance. And there is a lot of kind of follow your leader in film criticism. People don't want to be the dissenting voice. They don't want to be the person who goes, well, actually, I don't understand that, and here's why I don't understand it. And there's been a few what I would call horror films, thriller films, darker films recently that I feel like I'm one of only a handful of voices going, well, hang on a minute, that's and it has been, as a woman, I don't like the way women are being represented in this film. And I think perhaps as a female critic, I'm more sensitive to that, maybe. But then there are male critics who write about the depiction of women in film very, you know, intelligently. And so I don't really know what I'm trying to say. I think it's important for critics of either genre to keep writing about film, to keep their voices out there, so that young people coming up thinking, I want to write about horror, I want to make horror, know that there's a huge audience out there for it. And they're not just men. They're not just young men. They're older people, men, women. It annoys me that we're still now in 2015 pigeonholing film in this way. It's frustrating, and perhaps that is one of the tasks of the critic to make an audience realise that we just want audiences want a good story. They don't care if it's horror or thriller or comedy. We want it comes back to the story. It always comes back to good writing, whether it's a review or a film. The narrative is essentially what's going to get you your audience. As a freelancer, I'm very lucky in that I work with some very progressive editors, one of whom is a woman. And no, I have to be honest and say I have not, as a freelancer. That's not to say I haven't when I was on staff at magazines. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have been senior or commissioning editorial for the majority of my career, because I was just lucky enough to, well, it's a combination of luck, determination and sheer hard work to work my way up fairly quickly. I've had, not through commissioning, but I've had certain people say, are you sure you're the right person to be reviewing this? You know, whether it's publicists or colleagues, you know. As far as I'm concerned, I'm passionate about film. I have two eyes. I can inform an opinion, and I can write okay, I think. You know, it's one of the things I can do. So yes, I am the right person. Why wouldn't I be? Because, I mean, why wouldn't I be? I have to say, it's not just in criticism I've encountered this. I've had many people, when I've edited 2 film magazines now, and I've encountered it in terms of that as well. People thinking I'm the secretary, people thinking that I would be a man. My name is Nikki. People assuming that would be a man. People turning up to the office assuming I'm the PA. People not talking to me in commissioning meetings, talking to the publisher because he happens to be a man. And that's fairly recently. There are still people out there who think that women cannot do this, and that to me is, I genuinely do not understand where it's coming from. And when you challenge people about this, 9 times out of 10, they don't really have an argument. And you know, you can say that I'd say 95% of it on the internet is trolling. It's trying to get a reaction, but then you do have people who genuinely believe that as a woman, just because of my gender, nothing else. They don't take into account my education, the fact I've been doing this for 13 years. It's just because I happen to be a woman that I can't possibly write about this film. And when I have disagreed with the majority, and I suppose because the majority of critics still happen to be men, there are some fantastic female voices out there, but the majority of film critics in the UK who have what I would call a solid platform, so the newspapers, the bigger sites, happen to be men. And when you disagree with that male voice, you become open to offensive remarks about, I won't go into it, but it's pretty disgusting. And as I say, I've certainly not had the worst of it. Some of my colleagues have had pretty disgusting things, and only because, I didn't like Transformers, and I'm a woman. It's because I'm a woman that I didn't like Transformers. It's not because it's just, not a very good film.
Not because almost no critics
Exactly. I don't want to really go into individual films, but a typical one recently was Ex Machina, which I thought it was visually stunning, thought it was an interesting idea, but I thought it had fundamentally terrible issues when it came to its thoughts about depiction of women. And I wrote a very long form piece of criticism in which I attempted to, and I think I did, explain why I had I didn't just say it and that was it. I explained why, and still I had people, particularly on Twitter, when it's very difficult to get into a discussion because of that little snippet format. And I don't think people are trying to condense ideas into that format, and I think sometimes it comes across wrong, but I still had people suggesting I was, misinformed, or that was the intention of the filmmaker, not taking into account one iota that was what I read from that film. And I wasn't alone in that opinion. I think I wonder what would have happened had a man said it. I don't think no one would have said to them, you can't possibly identify with how women are being treated in this film because you're a man. You can't possibly identify with what this male filmmaker's trying to say because you're a woman. And that's what we get. And that's it is disheartening, but you just have to plough through it, and it takes a determination to ignore that and to keep going, and that's what we try and do.
Well, as I said earlier, I do apologise for asking you questions about your role as a female critic when obviously I'm not asking male critics the same question.
It's a question that needs to be asked,
yeah.
and one would hope that we get to a stage where the question is not what it's like, what is it like to be a female critic, but what is it like to be a critic, as the same as what is it like to be a female director. What's it like to be a director? And female filmmakers have the same thing. It's intrinsic in the industry, which has always been male dominated, just as it's intrinsic in society. And I think there are many of us, not just women, also a lot of men, who are working really hard to fight against that. And the only thing we can do as critics is keep writing. I'm not going to say, oh my gosh, some, anonymous commenter, told me I couldn't write about films because I'm a woman. Okay, yes, some of the things have been upsetting, and you get angry, and you get upset. And I think probably a lot of men have had criticism levelled at them, but it's not the same gender-specific, really offensive. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
really offensive.
I've never had gender-specific criticism.
So and people think that. I think people think because you're a woman, they can call into question things like your appearance, your loyalties. The fact that you have kids and that you might be bringing up those children, means you can't possibly devote your time and energy to film criticism or to watching a film.
Again, this is a question that no one has ever asked of me, but I was bringing up my children while...
And that's the point, isn't it? Nobody... The assumption is that the childcare, the home, falls to the woman. I'm lucky in that I have an incredibly supportive husband who has always supported my career. Today he's at home looking after our child. No one would ever say to him if he's out at an event for his work, and he has a very demanding job that he is very good at and he takes very seriously. No one ever asks him, where's your son? Aren't you thinking about your son at this point? And I've had, people say to me very good-naturedly and very, nothing but the best intentions, you've got out, have you? As if it's a hobby. This is my job, so yes. And I think this is something that needs to be talked about as well, that when you have a child or you have a family, that puts an extra pressure on a female, or particularly, or on a male, on anybody. Having a child at home or a family to support adds an extra pressure of time, of money, and it's another thing to just keep ploughing through. And that's why I say you have to be determined and passionate, because there's a lot of things that, this is not a 9-to-5 traditional easy job where you work 5 days a week and get a paycheck at the end. This is a career born out of passion. And I'm sure it's the same for you and the same for the majority of critics. You say to them, what else can you do? And they're like, I don't know what else I could do. What else could I do? I'm so passionate about films and about writing about them. I couldn't... And people say, you should try being a filmmaker. If you didn't like this film, you should try making one. I don't want to try making one. I could not make a film. I am full of respect and admiration for anybody who makes a film, whatever I might think of it. It's a huge achievement that I couldn't possibly even attempt. I wouldn't know where to start, but I do know how to critique a film. I do know how to form an opinion and how to write about it, and that's what I will continue to do. And it's very easy to lose perspective when you're being... as a young person who loves films, when you're being given access and, all of this stuff, it's very easy, particularly nowadays, to take that for granted. And that didn't happen when I started. It was... I think back then you had to prove... And also I think it's because so many outlets are closing.
Yeah.
PRs, people who promote films, quite rightly need positive press, and they want, as in my experience as a commissioning editor, they want those quotes from recognisable professional critics and recognisable professional platforms. And a lot of those are closing. Magazines are closing, papers are losing their arts desk. Anybody can start their own WordPress site or whatever blog site and start writing about film. That doesn't mean you're going to find an audience. If you want to write about film, like I'm saying, just for the free stuff, or just so you can say to your mates, yeah, I've seen Transformers, 2 days before you have. And this is another problem of modern reviewing. It's this rush to be first, this rush to get your review on your website to your outlet before anyone else, so you can pick up that traffic, online traffic. Somebody who... I'm of the belief, and it's very easy for me to say this because of the realm in which I work, I'm of the belief that if you're going to write a good piece of criticism, you're not going to write it in the 20 minutes after you've seen a film. You can come out of a film on a high, on a low. You need to think about it. There are some exceptional critics who can do that, and whose reviews I read, the next day or an hour after the film, and they're succinct and they're really well written, whether I agree with them or not. And they can do that. But for me, I have to think about it. I have to let it percolate. And there's a reason why there's great critical essays written a year, 5 years, 10 years after films. Because opinions change and develop as you develop. And interestingly, I saw an argument on Twitter a few months ago about this. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, and I wouldn't say anyway, but somebody had tweeted that they'd rewatched a film and had completely changed their opinion on it. It was a film they'd seen as a youngster. They'd watched it, I don't know, 10, 15 years later. It was a well-known film, and it had changed their opinion. And he got a raft of abuse that he couldn't possibly be a proper critic. Critics stand by their opinions, you know. And I think, how short-sighted is that of you? And it was from other reviewers, critics, bloggers, his contemporaries. And I think, how short-sighted is that? If you think that you can watch a film once and that opinion will then stand for the whole of your life. And I think a good critic is also someone who knows that their viewpoint will change with their life experience. You know, the more films you watch, the more understanding you have of the cinema landscape as a whole. The older you get, the priorities in your life change, and that will, of course, inform your opinion, because, as I said before, it's your opinion informed by who you are and your experiences. And so I think that flexibility, that ability to change, the ability to know when you were wrong, or no right or wrong, actually, that's the ability to know that your opinion has changed and your new opinion is no less valid than your old opinion. That's something that's essential as well. Sorry, I've completely forgotten what your first question was. I went off on a tangent there, but yeah, so that's all to do with the blogosphere, and you know, it's a great breeding ground for new writers, but as you say, not everybody's going to make it, and you have to be determined and passionate and open-minded and without that sense of entitlement.